Most 3D printers use plastic to make parts, but I turned my printer into a sandwich machine, and in this video I will show you how I got it to work, and how, in the process, I ended up taking control over my 3D printer. I started off by making a spatula so that the printer can grab the bread. It will use the holes in the printer's head as mounting points. And after printing it, I tested it and it fits pretty well. I made the spatula sit lower than the nozzle because the spatula needs to be touching the bed, but we don't want the nozzle to be dragged over the bed. With the spatula complete, it was now time to tackle the software. As a first test, all I want to do is see if the printer will be able to grab the slice of bread. So I made a thin pillar with a line at the top so that the printer moves the bed down and then the tool head forward. I added a pause right before it prints the line so that I can place the bread and spatula. I also used detect thin walls so that it goes over the path once instead of twice. The last thing to do was get it not to extrude plastic. This was simple. All I did was set the flow rate to 0 and lower the bed temperature to 20 so that the bed doesn't warm up. After all that, the time had come to test it for the first time. I sent the G-code and the printer started to work. After the printer paused, I attached the spatula and placed a plastic bag on the print bed to keep everything clean. And after I continued it, the printer started moving the tool head forward, but instead of putting the spatula under the bread, it just pushed the bread off the bed. Clearly, I need something to stop the bread from falling off. I could close the printer door, but that would make it difficult for me to move things around, and would also make it difficult for the camera to see what's happening inside. So I designed a bumper. It uses the part of the bed that protrudes out as support and uses the holes to the side to anchor itself in place. After placing it, it wasn't perfect, the pillars didn't fit and the spring was not tight enough. But after a few iterations, both of those problems were solved, and now everything fits perfectly. With all that done, I tested it again, and it worked. However, the bread fell off the spatula. Clearly something needs to change. And apart from that, there was another problem. Right now, each slice is about 12 cm across. This means that at best I can only have 2 ingredients, but I want to have more. Luckily, after a bit of maths, I realized that if I shrunk the items down to make them 8 cm across, I could fit 3 across. And if I placed another row behind them, it could give me 6 total ingredients. And as a side effect of them being smaller, the printer should have an easier time grabbing them. I also added a small delay. However, because of the increased complexity of the path, I had to enable Arcane, so that the printer follows the path instead of jumping around from place to place. I also removed the pillar, in favor of using physical spacers to lift the build plate off of the heated bed, in order to create the offset needed because the nozzle is above the spatula. And I also removed the plastic bag, since it was causing the nozzle to get stuck on it and gripping it, so instead I used some warm soapy water to clean the bed. With all these changes made, it was now time for another test, and it worked. With grabbing the ingredients sorted out, it was now time to try getting the printer to drop them off at the right place. Sadly, I don't think we can just reverse the steps we took to grab the bread, since I can't place the bumper in the middle of the bed. So instead, I will be using something to force the bread to fall off. If we split the spatula into 2 pieces and move them to opposite sides, when the bread is on the spatula, all we need to do is have something force the bread to fall off. After I finished modeling, I sent everything to get printed. And obviously, the one time I didn't record the printer is the time that something goes wrong. It looks like while it was being printed, the model detached from the print bed, but the supports didn't, making the part split in 2. Luckily, it should still work. I also updated the G-code by adding a part that makes it move to the side and then lowers the bed, hopefully forcing the bread to fall off. It was now time for another test, and it worked without any major hiccups. It grabbed the bread, took it below the pusher and lowered the bed, forcing the bread to fall off. And with all that done, it was time to try having multiple ingredients be stacked at once. My idea so far was simple. I would enable by object so that I could have the printer place one object and then the other object. However, rather quickly I realized that it wouldn't work. The slicer wasn't letting me move them close enough to each other, so I did the only thing that came to my mind at the time, and tried modifying the values used by the slicer to determine where it is safe to move to. but they were grayed out and I didn't know how to edit them, so instead I started using Orca Slicer since it gives me more control. However, after editing the values, I found another problem. The slicer is stupid and doesn't realize that nothing is being printed in the middle, so it still doesn't work. By this point I was starting to get annoyed, but I wasn't ready to give up yet. So I tried splitting the model into multiple parts, with the hope that it would let me place them closer to each other, and it worked. But for some reason, the slicer wasn't making the printhead go in the right direction. Clearly this wasn't going to work, despite all the settings I tried to change. The only solution I could think of is custom G-code. The idea is simple. The printer uses pre-programmed code to both start and finish each print job. So if I got the printer to do nothing and modified the end code, it would do whatever I told it to. The only problem is that there is no room for error, so I got to work. And after 3 days of procrastinating, it was now ready. It's a really simple program, but before I explain what it does, here are the basics. If a line begins with the letter G, then more than likely it is related to movement. For example, G1F100 is used to specify the speed to travel at, and G1X128Y128 moves the head to the middle. There are a lot more commands, like M400U1, which waits for the user to resume the print, but for the most part, those are all the commands I used. With all that being said, right now, the program makes the head go to the middle of the bed, and then pauses, so that I can place everything in place, and after I continue it, it goes back to the middle, and then goes forward, before continuing the normal end G-code. Before sending the G-code, I gave the program a fitting name, and for the first time in this entire project, it worked first try. Despite me thinking that making custom G-code would have been too much work, it probably should have been the first thing I tried. And since modifying the G-code should be straightforward, I set to work remaking the travel path in G-code, and after some time, I finished it. So I sent the G-code again, and it worked perfectly. So I edited it to use 3 slices of bread, and it also worked. The last thing I wanted to test is using 2 ingredients behind one another. So I edited the code again, and it also worked. However, before finally making a sandwich, I wanted to try changing something. Right now, because of the height at which the ingredients are falling, they are not all going on each other. So I designed some walls. And finally, it was time for the final test. I will be making a ham and cheese sandwich, so I modified the G-code so that it can have 4 ingredients instead of 3, and prepared the ham, cheese and bread. After sending the G-code and the printer paused, I inserted all the ingredients, and it started to work on making the sandwich. It started by grabbing the cheese, but the cheese had gotten so soft, it fell off. Clearly doing this experiment in the middle of a heatwave was a bad idea. And so, after 4 days of waiting, I placed the ingredients in the printer. But even with the walls, it couldn't place them down on top of each other. So I came up with a different mechanism. Instead of bending the ingredients, which forces them to drop from quite high up, I removed both walls and replaced them with a single pillar. And I also changed the code a bit. So now, when the printer grabs the ingredients, it doesn't push it all the way in till it reaches the end, but instead leaves a bit of space, so that when the head goes above the pillar and lowers itself, it allows the pillar to go in between the head and the ingredient. And so, when the head moves backwards, it makes the ingredients fall neatly on each other. And with all that done, it was finally time for the last test. It grabbed the cheese and placed it on the bread, and it then grabbed the slice of ham, and finally, it grabbed the final slice of bread. And it had worked. It might not be the fastest, and it might not be the most reliable, but it still works. This was obviously a silly project, but I am legitimately happy with how it came out. It might be a silly idea, but it shows what can be accomplished with a bit of ingenuity. Before ending the video, there is obviously a lot of content I had to cut out, like all the testing I needed to do to get everything to move to the right place. Safe to say, things didn't always go well. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any suggestions, leave a comment down below, and see you next time.